Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Single Best Idea out on YouTube Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, 47 other places I can't remember as well. We say to you, thank you. I know you're listening to podcasts like The Big Take. David Gura recently really strong in our politics. His conversation with different politicians. With Janet Yellen, I thought was the Secretary of Treasury, was just really prescient. But, The Big Take, 20-minute podcast, we try to slip it in with a 5 or 6 minute jewel for you of conversation. Steve Eisman darkening the door today. You knew him in The Big Short. I actually quoted a thing on The Big Short on the banks. Eisman said the banks, well, it's better, but that's not where he is. He's focused on broad themes of artificial intelligence, technology, and infrastructure. That's where Steve Eisman is right now. We were focused on the Fed yesterday. Thanks for the huge response to the Fed Decides. Really, really extraordinary with no market reaction. And then this morning, boom, up we go with a bid to the market, to say the least. Jim Caron joined from Morgan Stanley. Talked to him about all sorts of things, including the Bowdoin Observatory. Here, Jim Caron on debt and Powell.
My view is that if we are in an inflationary environment, and I still believe that we are in one, inflation stable for now, then that means that the Fed does not have a free shot at just cutting interest rates as aggressively without inflation picking up. And so my suspicion here, again, this is a suspicion, one of the things that triggered the Fed to move as aggressively as they did is that they may think that the employment situation is worse than what the data is actually telling us, and that they do need to move quickly today. So this goes back to the thought that if they go 50, what are they telling the markets? Should we be nervous? I'm a little concerned here, and I want to be very clear about that. I want to admit that I think the unemployment rate is probably really higher than what is actually being forecasted in the data.
Boy, did we have fun with this. Jim Caron is prodigious in legitimate physics, mathematics, and astronomy out of Bowdoin and Caltech. And I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but we took it over to the geometric space. And you remember a Cartesian chart you made in school of a y-axis and an x-axis. Well, think about an axis coming out of the page. That's a z-axis. And that gets you into a thing called spherical geometry. And if you have three ideas, as Mr. Caron talks about there, the one he's looking at as the mystery is the labor economy. And of all our conversations today, that's centered around to the October labor report, the first week of November. Anna Wong was brilliant on that. To continue, Jim Caron here again as he looks forward in the Fed.
This is positive for risky assets and credit spreads, just broadly speaking. Powell is basically saying that he is going to stand behind and support this market. If we look at default rates have been coming down. Specifically, Tom, default rates have been coming down even in the CCC space. So even in the part of the credit market that people are worried about the most, so the lower credit echelons, CCCs, those spreads have actually started to come in as well. Now, if that starts to happen, then what you're going to see is a decline in the overall yield for high yield, and it makes it a very positive setup for these assets. And let's not just talk about high yield. We can also talk about private credit, private assets, all of these other things, all are competing with each other for returns. So as these bond yields and these credit spreads start to come in, money is going to start to follow it. And I think this becomes positive, not just for bonds, but also for equities.
Jim Caron, generous half hour with us today. He is with Morgan Stanley. One of the things we've done right from the beginning, and I can honestly say, folks, I don't know where this started. I think it just started out of my curiosity. Curiosity is an important word for Matt Winkler, who was the founder of Bloomberg News, founding editor-in-chief and now editor-in-chief emeritus. But the curiosity of who are these people and what were their life. We talked to Anna Wong today about her first moment at Berkeley with the giant Barry Eichengreen of international economics. Well, we talked to, Joe Davis shows up from Vanguard, always interesting, looking at really twisted things for the giant of index funds. And, what you got to ask Joe Davis is simple. How scared were you sitting in the chair with John Bogle?
The first question he asked me, my first day on the job, he goes, Joe, you need to help me help investors have a cogent framework for where will long-term earnings growth be, dividends, and what drives interest rates. Right, and so and Tom, as you well know, we are a very large active fixed income manager, so our cyclical assessment of risks of the economy matter a lot. But I think it's really that long term. How do I think about debt? How do I think about AI? What, if any, would that mean for corporate earnings and the portfolios we have to assemble for clients? So that's why I've been there for 20 years, and economists sometimes don't always last that long. But that's really been the big reason. And our group has grown. I mean, we have a 75-person research organization at Vanguard.
Joe Davis at Vanguard, his sidecar right now is he's really, really studying how much of artificial intelligence will be will have impact on society looking out 5 and 10 years. Just an extraordinary Thursday here after the Fed. Need to say thank you to Talia and all of the Fed Decides meeting, and also, of course, what we're driving in the conversation each and every morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. Again, out on YouTube, record audience yesterday. Thank you for that. Humbled by the numbers. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Tell your dog to subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. It's the only reason we exist out on YouTube. Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, SiriusXM. I got yelled at because I didn't mention SiriusXM. Really a seminal distribution for us. Good morning across the quarter from Washington to New York. To 92.9 FM in Boston. On YouTube podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, single best idea.